Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are officially throwing out the pristine, sterile academic theories, and we're diving headfirst into the messy, high-stakes reality of modern back-end architectures. We're going to explore how massive distributed systems actually handle failures, balance data correctness, and optimize performance when the pressure is really on. So, if you want to know how the biggest platforms in the world actually stay online when networks inevitably fail, well, you are in exactly the right place. I want to start by dropping a rather shocking statistic just to set the stage here. 30,000. When you pull out your phone and initiate a single ride-hailing request at Uber, that one little tap traverses approximately 500 discrete microservices. And in doing so, it triggers over 30,000 remote procedure calls, or RPCs. That is an absolute explosion of back-end interconnection just to get you a ride across town. And really, that brings us to the central tension of our explainer today. With that staggering level of complexity, how do these hyperscale systems survive without just completely collapsing? Because at that scale, a minor latency degradation in one non-critical service can easily cascade, multiply, and cause a catastrophic failure of your core business functionality. So how do they engineer their way out of total failure? Okay, let's look at our roadmap. We are covering beyond the textbook cap, enter the pace CLC theorem, real-world CP versus AP, battling latency at scale, and finally, idempotency and safe retries. Let's jump right in. All right, part one, beyond the textbook cap. So you gotta ask, is the cap theorem a lie? Well, no, it's not a lie. But honestly, the way it's usually presented in computer science textbooks is highly misleading when you're actually trying to keep a production system breathing during a massive network outage. Let's do a super quick refresher. Eric Brewer's original cap theorem basically states that a distributed system can only guarantee two of three things at the exact same time. You've got consistency, meaning all nodes reflect the exact same data. You've got availability, meaning every single request gets a response. And you've got partition tolerance, meaning the whole system keeps chugging along even if the network communication between your nodes completely breaks down. Now, here is the stark contrast between the myth and the reality. The textbook casually tells you to pick 2 out of 3, as if you can just politely opt out of partition tolerance. You absolutely cannot. In the real world, network partitions are an inevitable fact of physics. Cables get cut, routers catch fire, things happen. Because partitions are guaranteed to happen, your system simply must be partition tolerant. Therefore, the only real engineering choice you ever actually get to make is strictly between consistency and availability when that partition hits. Which brings us to part 2. Enter the PACE-LC theorem. PACEL. It sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but it is a crucial evolution of CAP for everyday operations. It breaks down like this. If a partition happens, you choose availability or consistency. Else, meaning when the system is perfectly healthy and doing exactly what it's supposed to do, you choose between latency and consistency. I love this because it brilliantly illustrates that even without failures, your architecture is in this constant, never-ending battle between absolute correctness and sheer speed. And when we talk about speed, the physical limits are incredibly strict. Take a look at this baseline constraint, 0.3 to 0.4 milliseconds. When a Tier 1 bank was out there tuning Apache Kafka, they measured the actual physical ping latency between their 2 data centers, and they realized this number is literally an immutable floor. Any duration beyond this baseline is pure overhead that you have to relentlessly optimize away. Every single fraction of a millisecond you spend coordinating consistency is a direct penalty to your latency. Moving right along to part 3, real-world CP versus AP. Let's look at how this plays out in the wild. E-commerce giants like Amazon, they typically favor an AP system, availability and partition tolerance. If the network hiccups, they will happily accept temporary data inconsistencies just to make absolutely sure. You can always add that item to your cart and check out. Conversely, CP systems, like the ones running our financial services, prioritize strict consistency. They rely on synchronous replication. If there's a partition, they will actively reject your request rather than risk recording a totally incorrect account balance. But modern engineering doesn't just throw its hands up and surrender to these trade-offs, right? We innovate around them. Take modern distributed SQL databases like TidyB. They engineer very acceptable trade-offs to deliver strong consistency at scale. They use the Raft consensus algorithm to strictly guarantee transaction order and basically prevent data divergence when the network gets messy. But to fight back against the inevitable latency penalty of being CP, they use clever architectures like fast local reads through follower replicas. They're dynamically balancing that pass-LC equation. All right, part 4, battling latency at scale. I want you to consider a very practical engineering problem here. What happens when a user's request is fanned out across multiple database shards and just one single shard decides to be a little slow? How much does that actually impact the end user? Let's do the math on these P99 latency tails, because honestly, it is brutal. Suppose your query fans out to 10 shards. Now, say each individual shard is highly optimized. You've only got a tiny 1% chance of hitting a slow 80 millisecond delay on any given shard. Sounds amazing, right? But here's the catch. Your end-to-end latency is dictated by the slowest shard. Because you're hitting 10 of them, the math becomes 1 minus 0.99 to the power of 10. The result? Suddenly, there is nearly a 10% chance, almost 1 in 10 requests, that your user experiences a slow, lagging interface. At scale, a rare 1% edge case quickly becomes an everyday nightmare. So, to combat this, engineers really have to rethink how services give up. You can't just slap simple timeouts on everything. Timeouts create this awful cascading waterfall effect where each hop in that 500 service chain waits its full individual limit, leaving the user staring at a spinning wheel literally forever. Instead, high-performance systems use deadlines. Deadlines act as an end-to-end budget that propagates along with the request. If that budget gets exhausted by upstream delays, the downstream services immediately reject the doomed request, freeing up vital resources for everyone else. Finally, part 5, idempotency and safe retries. To really understand the stakes of safe retries, just consider this number, $640 billion. That is the massive annual payment volume processed by Stripe. Every single one of those transactions is protected from accidental duplicate charges by strict idempotency guarantees. So how do they pull that off? Let's walk through Stripe's idempotency flow. First, the client sends a payment request holding a unique idempotency key header. Second, Stripe server immediately checks a distributed Redis cache to see if it's seen this exact key in the last 24 hours. Third, if the key exists, and here's the truly brilliant detail, if the request parameters perfectly match the original request, it just returns the cache success response without processing a new charge. If the parameters don't match, it blocks the request to prevent misuse. Finally, if it's a brand new key, it processes the charge safely. So a client can retry a failing network call a dozen times without ever accidentally double charging a customer. Under the hood, architects usually pick between 2 major ways to build this out. For high-stakes operations like payments, they use explicit duplication tables. Now, this requires extra storage and it adds a slight database query latency penalty, but it gives you a rock-solid explicit audit trail. On the flip side, for lower-stakes state machines, they use conditional updates, which is basically optimistic locking. There are no extra tables. Instead, it relies on checking version numbers in the database before updating. It's way faster, but your clients have to be smart enough to handle the version conflicts themselves. We've covered a massive amount of ground in this explainer today, from shattering those textbook cat myths to the grim realities of latency tails and building safe retries. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to take back to your own engineering projects. In your architecture, exactly where are you enforcing strong consistency? And what is that guarantee actually costing you in terms of latency and availability? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep building resilient systems.